Good evening and welcome to our show, Brookfield Public Advocate. I'm your host, Bruce Senig. As Brookfield Public Advocate begins its third year on Charter Channel 21, regular viewers of the show know that for the past 2 years, we've been doing a series titled Meet the Candidates. Last month, March 25th to be exact, tonight's guest announced his candidacy on the steps of the Capitol in Hartford for Connecticut's Secretary of State. I believe you'll find this a very informative interview. Our guest is Peter Lumaj, who first appeared on The Advocate last year. Peter, thank you for coming and welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me, sir.
For viewers that might have missed your appearance last year, you have an interesting story. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, 24 years ago, my three brothers and I escaped communist Albania and came to the United States as refugees. The moment we escaped Albania, my entire family was picked up by the communist regime, taken into a concentration camp, and that's where my father passed away, in the camp. Once we came to the United States, I was able to go to school, eventually learned enough English to go to college, graduated from college with a degree in political science. Then I went to law school, became an attorney. Meanwhile, between law school and college and law school, I worked for the city of New York as a fraud investigator, investigated white-collar crimes for about 8 years in New York City. Then I moved up north, and now I live in Fairfield with my wife and 3 kids.
Terrific. That's quite a story.
Thank you.
Would you also tell our viewers a little bit about why you decided to run for the office of Secretary of State of Connecticut?
Well, I think that the Republican Party, and I'm running as a Republican, the Republican Party has neglected this office for many, many years. What happened since 1959, with the exception of 91 to 95, this office actually has been held by the Democrats. And from my point of view, I think this, the Secretary of State's office is extremely important for the Republican Party, for any party actually. I see that as one of the most important offices right after the governor's office, because the functions of the Secretary of the State, the job description itself, it deals direct with the integrity of our voting system, one of the issues that the Secretary of State would deal with. And the Republicans, for whatever reasons, to a certain extent, had written off this office, as I said, with the exception of 91 to 95, since 1959. And eventually I consulted with the party, and I see that as an opportunity for our party to capture this office.
That would be an interesting trivia question. Who was the state's Secretary of State in 91 and 95? You've run for statewide office before. What did you learn from that experience?
Well, first of all, I enjoyed every single second during that campaign. I got to travel all over the state. I've seen all the counties. I've seen all the cities. It's just a beautiful state that we live in, no question about it. But what I've learned is this. The Republican Party, and I'm going to speak about the Republican Party more than the Democrat Party, I guess, but the Republican Party does have a challenge right now in our state. And the challenge that I see is this: every person that I spoke with that has left our party somehow and became independent or unaffiliated tells us the same story, that we never left the Republican Party. The Republican Party left us. So that's a concern that I see in the Republican Party, losing voters, becoming independent or unaffiliated. The other thing that I saw learned during the campaign is the fact that many voters are disappointed with both parties. They believe that once we get someone elected, whether it's the legislative, the executive branch, or even the judiciary, they just completely forget the issues that the voters are facing. And that has, to a certain extent, discouraged these voters from even, going out to vote. So those are concerns more than learning. What I've learned is that, the voters are really hungry to see ordinary folks getting involved to running for these offices. And that's what I would encourage: more ordinary people, businessmen, doctors, lawyers, someone who is not after the position, after the job, but it's after, doing something for the community, doing something for the state, to run for an office.
Not make it a complete career. Mm-hmm. Peter, would you explain to the audience just what exactly the duties are of the Secretary of State? Because I don't know about others, but I sometimes am a little baffled by what these duties might be.
Well, the office itself is very powerful. The most important role, or the most important job, part of the job description for the Secretary of State, is that he or she would serve as the commissioner of voters. In other words, if there is a dispute in our local elections, state elections, or federal elections, he or she who holds this office will be, if you will, the referee between these disputes. And we saw that in 2000, was that in 2000 Florida, when we had the Bush v. Gore case, and the Secretary of State became, very, very important actually in that election. The other function that the Secretary of State has is the public records are kept by the Secretary of State. The business records are kept by the Secretary of State. The other thing that the Secretary of State does, it sort of interprets the election law, whether it's the local, state, or federal. It's interpreted by the Secretary of State and investigates allegations involving fraud or integrity of the voting system. So it's a very powerful position for the state.
Could you tell the folks a little bit about what you feel your strengths are, what qualities you bring to the table?
Well, the background that I have, I mean, I grew up in a country where voting meant nothing. Pretty much we had a government that appointed our leaders. We never got to elect them. Recently, what I've seen is that we don't want to get to the point that our voting doesn't mean anything. Our vote doesn't mean anything. We saw the issues that we faced, if you go back to Bridgeport, when we had the issue of voters who turned out not to be resident of our state and were able to vote over there. We had a bag of votes which was found in Bridgeport a day after the election. Those votes were counted. It sort of determined the outcome of our election. And we got a governor that could have, someone else could have been the governor had the voting or those votes been investigated properly. It was never investigated. So what I bring to the table is this. I investigated white-collar crimes for almost 8 years. And this, from my point of view, if there is voter fraud in our state, it is a white-collar crime. So that's a strength that I bring over here. The other thing that I bring over here is the background that as an attorney, I wouldn't have any problems to take a case to court and litigate that case. Myself or my office would do that. So those are strengths that I would bring over here. And the other thing is this. I have a firm belief I'm a firm believer actually in our free elections, fair elections, and that each vote should count. But each person who votes in our state should be a qualified voter. In other words, you can have people who are not state residents who may vote over here. But then we have non-citizens who may be voting over here. So we want to make sure that any qualified voter in our state should be able to vote if they choose to do so. No obstacles whatsoever. But then the ones who are not qualified voters should be excluded from voting, from being able to vote.
Yeah. I don't know whether you might be able to answer this or not, but getting back to the last election in 2010, is it up to the Secretary of State to investigate maybe on their own, or does a complaint have to be brought to the Secretary of State?
A complaint has to be brought. And there were complaints, actually. I mean, if you look at the extension of the voting hours that were extended, there were complaints. The Secretary of State did receive the complaints. And sometimes it's so obvious, so conspicuous, that if a bag of votes is found under a desk a day after, and they decided to count those votes, the Secretary of State should have made a statement and get involved in it and say, where did the votes come from? Who brought them in? How did someone forget them under the desk? Why would you count them now? Because the number of votes in that bag was approximately equivalent to the number of votes by which our candidate, the Republican, lost. And the interesting thing is this, that every time that there is an allegation of voter fraud, if they are investigated, most of the times, those voters who fraudulently voted in local or state or federal elections, they turn out to have voted for the Democrat Party. And the Republicans somehow are just, silent about these issues.
Do you bring a particular philosophy to the office?
I think it's a simple philosophy that each Secretary of State should have. We have to have fair elections. We have to have free elections, not to create unnecessary obstacles for any voters who want to vote over here, and make sure that voting is devoid of fraud. No fraud whatsoever.
Like Washington, there seems to be extreme partisanship in Hartford. Can you tell the folks how you would work with the other side of the aisle and maybe cut through some of this partisanship.
Well, the Secretary of State, one of the things that he or she would do is that they would, on a regular basis, appear before the legislative body and the executive body. And he or she would have a powerful position in persuading both parties to work together. Now, how she, especially when it comes to businesses, because the Secretary of State does handle certain transactions of business law in our state. You know, it's just a persuasive part that he or she can play to both the Democrats and the Republicans when he or she appears before them at the legislative body.
Now, each office, of course, in Hartford has different responsibilities, but what do you see as some of the important issues that the state of Connecticut just has to deal with and not kick down the can down the road as they seem to do so often?
The major issues that we're facing as a state is taxation, which, you know, whether it's property taxes, income taxes, I mean, taxes keep on going higher and higher, and, you know, they're going to have to deal with that. I don't know whether it's the Republicans being able to put some pressure on Democrats and the governor to, you know, stop, you know, him from raising taxes and for other. Is job creation. We're killing jobs in our state, and, you know, it has to do with the taxes again, because the business environment that we have created in the state, instead of attracting businesses into our state, we're pretty much pushing them out of the state. So they're going to have to deal with those issues. I mean, taxes and employment, I think, is extremely important that they tackle it as soon as possible.
Yeah. Are there any pledges, if you are fortunate enough to become the Republican nominee and then subsequently win the election, are there any pledges that you would like to make to the voters?
Well, the pledge that I would make to the voters is that if there's an allegation with regard to voter fraud in our state, whether it comes from the Democrats, the Republicans, or independents, I would make sure that my office would handle those allegations, will investigate them fully, and make sure that we make them public, so the public knows that if there is a problem with our vote and with the integrity of the voting system, we'll make it public.
Okay. Now, again, I don't know that this falls under the purview of Secretary of State, but one of my things that I've been espousing for more than 30 years, just out of curiosity, your position on term limits.
Statewide or nationwide?
Statewide, since you're running for a statewide office.
I don't believe in career politicians. I think that there should be a term limit. I have no problems with that, because what happens, even within the Republican Party, and I do have these disagreements sometimes with them, that we shouldn't challenge anyone who has been in Hartford, let's say, for 15 years. Because that person has established the background and, you know, the knowledge that they need. But actually, that has become a job for these people, for our, you know, representatives, and I think there should be a term limit. I have no problems with that.
Yeah. There's no term limit, I believe, currently in Connecticut for any statewide offices.
That's my understanding.
Yeah. Okay.
That's my understanding.
Well, we're coming close to the close. It's maybe not the best use of the language, but as we come to the close, are there a couple of things that you would like to leave with the audience?
Well, I think that it's extremely important that voters in our state register to vote in a timely fashion. Whether they want to vote Democrat, Republican, or Independent, that's perfectly fine with me. And understand that voting is extremely important. Two constitutional rights that I think are extremely significant for any citizen in our state is that you can run for an office as an ordinary citizen, and voting is extremely important. It counts. Every time that someone votes, they may think that their vote is not that important, but recently we have seen that elections are being determined by very, very slim margins. So get out, register, and vote.
Okay. Now, if viewers are so inclined, obviously we can just cover so much, and some of the viewers might have questions that, you know, I'm not even thinking of at this point, but if they're so inclined, how can they contact you or learn more about, you know, your positions and learn a little bit more about you?
Okay, well, we have a website. It's peterlumaj.com. It's very simple. Peter Lumaj.
Spell that out?
It's PETERLUMAJ.com. It's one word,
Okay.
peterlumaj.com.
Okay.
And the email is the same. It's peterlumaj@aol.com. And we have the contact information on the website, including the telephone number and a form that they can complete and ask questions.
Okay. Now, the office that you're running for, the election will be next year, 2014?
That is correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And do you know if any other people have, thrown their hat into the ring at this
From
point?
the Republican Party, I don't know anyone else yet. It doesn't mean that someone else is not going to jump in and, we have the primary. But as it stands right now, I don't know anyone else.
Yeah. On the Democrat side?
No, I don't think anybody is going to challenge the current Secretary of State that we have.
Okay. All right. Well, Peter, thanks for coming again. I appreciate it. And we're going to wrap up our show right now. Again, I'd like to thank tonight's special guest, Peter Lumaj, who is seeking the Republican nomination for Connecticut's Secretary of State, for appearing on our show. I want to remind our viewers that our air dates on Charter Channel 21 are Mondays at 4:30 and Thursdays at 7 p.m. We also, after the show airs, post it up on YouTube, where you can find this show and as well as prior shows. And we'd love to hear from you, whether it be comments on this show, prior shows, shows you'd like to see, guests you'd like to see, or just any topics. And you can send that along to us at our email address is brookfieldpublicadvocate@yahoo.com. Again, thank you for watching, and good night.